After a heart attack, I lay helpless in a hospital bed, surrounded by IV lines and monitors. My daughter visited, but barely looked up from her phone. My calculating son-in-law leaned closer and asked, "Have you signed the power of attorney?" Yet my youngest son never came. Instead, he posted photos of an expensive dinner on social media captioned, "Living my best life." Staring at the ceiling, I finally understood they weren't afraid I might die. They were only wondering who would inherit my house. Before we go further, if this story is already hitting close to home, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Your city, your country, your corner of the world. I read every single one. A quick note, this story contains fictional elements crafted for storytelling and educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual names or places is coincidental, but the message at the heart of it is one worth carrying with you. The night before, I cooked enough for 4 people. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans with butter the way Dot always made them. 4 plates set on this table before I even thought about it. 40 years of habit don't ask permission. I stood there looking at 3 empty chairs and felt the particular weight of a house that used to be full. I put 2 of the settings back in the cabinet, ate alone in the kitchen with just the range light on fork scraping against ceramic, the refrigerator humming its indifferent tune. I didn't call anyone. I never do. I told myself it was because I didn't want to be a burden. Standing there in the quiet, I was starting to think it was something else entirely. That was a Sunday night in early October. By Monday morning, my life had split itself into before and after. I was in the garage at 6:15 when it started. The garage is my place, always has been. 40 years of wood shavings and motor oil and the smell of things being made rather than bought. I had a cabinet door clamped on the workbench, a piece of white oak I'd been shaping for 2 weeks. I picked up the chisel. My hands knew what to do even when the rest of me didn't. Then the pain came, not like anything I'd felt before. This wasn't the dull ache I'd been shrugging off for 3 weeks, the tightness I'd filed under getting older and too much coffee. This was a fist closing around something inside my chest and squeezing. I set the chisel down very carefully, the way you set down a glass you know is about to fall. Breathed in, breathed out. The fist squeezed harder. I thought about Dot's shoes, the old work boots she'd bought me for my 60th birthday, sitting under the bench where I always left them. Brown leather worn down at the heel, the laces replaced twice. I thought if I go down in here, those boots will be the last thing I see. I grabbed the edge of the workbench with both hands and held on. That's when Walter's face appeared in the window. Walter Kowalski is 74 years old and has lived next door for 22 years. We play chess on Saturday mornings. Dot used to bring coffee out for both of us. She'd set 3 mugs on the porch rail and say, "The coffee's smarter than either of you." Because she was right. Walter saw me through the glass, holding onto the workbench, like it was the only solid thing left in the world. His eyes went wide. He was through the side door before I could wave him off. "Ray." He grabbed my arm, his grip steadier than a man his age had any right to have. "Ray, talk to me." "Where is it?" "Chest," I managed. "Left side. Been a few minutes." "Sit down." He lowered me to the stool like I was made of glass. His other hand was already pulling out his phone. "I'm calling 911. Walter, I don't need Raymond Arthur Holt," he said, and he used my full name the way Dot used to when I was being stupid about something. "If you tell me you're fine right now, I will hang up this phone and never speak to you again." I didn't tell him I was fine. The paramedics came in 6 minutes. I know because I counted something to do other than think about the fist in my chest getting tighter. Two young men, efficient and calm, asking me questions I knew how to answer even through the pain age, 72 medications, just aspirin, and a blood pressure pill, allergies, none any history of cardiac events, not until right now. They got me onto the gurney, and I looked up at my garage ceiling, the water stain shaped like the state of Ohio, that I'd been meaning to fix since 2019. The pegboard with every tool in its outline, the cabinet door still clamped on the workbench, waiting for me to come back. "Sir," one of the paramedics said, "is there anyone you'd like us to call?" I gave him Linda's number. "She's my daughter. Her name is first in my phone, first in my chest, first in every emergency form I'd ever filled out." I gave him the number and closed my eyes. The ambulance doors closed with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. Through the small rear window, I watched my house get smaller. The white oak siding I'd repainted 3 summers ago. The porch steps I'd rebuilt after the ice storm of 2018. The maple tree in the front yard that Tommy and I planted when he was 5 years old, and convinced that trees grew overnight if you talked to them enough. It was October, and the maple had gone full red, blazing against the gray morning sky like something on fire. I didn't know it then. I didn't know that while I was watching my house disappear through that small rectangle of glass, someone was already picking up a phone. Not to ask how I was, not to call the hospital, to start making plans. They told me it was a mild heart attack. The word mild does a lot of heavy lifting when it's sitting next to the words heart attack. The cardiologist, Dr. Okafor, a precise man with reading glasses he kept taking on and off, explained that I'd had a blockage in one of the smaller arteries. Caught early enough. No permanent damage they could see yet. I'd need to stay for monitoring, possibly 2 nights, possibly more, depending on how my numbers looked. "You're lucky," he said. "I know," I said. I didn't feel lucky. I felt like a man lying in a hospital bed, listening to machines report on his own heartbeat, like he wasn't in the room. Nurse Carol came on shift at noon. She's around 50, built like someone who has walked miles of hospital corridor and intends to walk miles more, with reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck and the unhurried manner of a person who has seen everything twice. She checked my IV line, adjusted something on the monitor, and then she did something unexpected. She looked directly at me. "Mr. Holt," she said, "is there anyone you actually want me to call, not your emergency contact? Not who's listed on the form?" She paused. "Anyone you actually want?" I opened my mouth and closed it. In 40 years of filling out paperwork, nobody had ever asked me that question. "There's a man named Walter Kowalski," I said. "He lives next door. He already knows I'm here. He rode in the ambulance with me. But if you could let him know I'm in a room now." Nurse Carol nodded and wrote it down. No follow-up questions. She pulled the privacy curtain back as she left, and I lay there thinking about what a strange and specific kindness that was asking not who was supposed to come, but who I actually wanted. Linda and Mark arrived at 3:15. I heard them in the hallway before I saw them. Mark's voice first, low and deliberate, the voice he uses when he's managing a situation. Then Linda's heels on the linoleum. She pushed through the door, holding a paper bag from a sandwich shop and wearing the bright, slightly too wide smile she puts on for difficult occasions. "Dad." She kissed my forehead. Her lips were cold. You look good, actually. Considering." "Considering?" I agreed. Mark shook my hand, firm 2 pumps, the handshake of a man who read a book about handshakes. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat forward with his elbows on his knees, and his eyes moved around the room in a way I recognized from somewhere I couldn't immediately place. Taking inventory, measuring. "Dad," he said, "has anyone talked to you about next steps, medically speaking?" "The doctor was in this morning." Right. Mark nodded. And beyond that, I mean thinking ahead, just practically speaking. Do you have a power of attorney set up just in case things get complicated? My chest tightened. Not the cardiac kind, the other kind. Mark, I said, I've been in this bed for 4 hours. He raised both hands, palms out. Absolutely, absolutely. No rush. I just want to make sure you're protected. We want to make sure you're protected. He glanced at Linda. She was looking at her phone. She had not asked me where the pain was. She had not asked what the doctor said about my heart. She had not asked if I was scared. They stayed 40 minutes. Mark talked about the logistics of recovery planning. Linda ate half a sandwich and checked her messages. When they left, Mark patted my shoulder and said, "We'll take care of everything, Dad. You just rest." The door swung shut behind them. I lay very still. Outside my window, the afternoon light was doing that October thing where it goes gold and sideways and makes everything look like a photograph of itself. 4 hours ago, I had been in my garage. 4 hours ago, Walter had held my arm and called my name like it mattered urgently that I stay in the world. My phone buzzed. Tommy. My younger son, 38 years old, my boy with Dot's eyes and his own particular talent for perfect timing. "Hey, Dad. Hope you feel better soon. Hey, when you're feeling up to it. Can we talk about that loan? No rush, LOL." Below the text was an Instagram post he'd just shared to his story. A restaurant table, a glass of red wine, a plate of food arranged for a photograph. The caption read, "Living my best life." Posted at 7:47 p.m. Precisely the hour the paramedics had been attaching leads to my chest. I set the phone face down on the blanket. My throat burned, not from the oxygen tube they'd had in earlier, but from something I didn't have a name for, yet something that had been building for longer than one Monday. Nurse Carol came back to check my vitals, and when she saw my face, she didn't ask what was wrong. She just checked the numbers, wrote them down, and said quietly on her way out, "The night shift is good here. You'll sleep." I didn't tell her I doubted that. I lay there in the cooling afternoon light, and I thought about a question I hadn't let myself ask in 3 years. Who exactly were these people I'd built a life for? And beneath that question, like a nail driven deep into old wood, was the one that kept me staring at the ceiling long after the lights dimmed. What were they going to do while I was lying here, unable to watch? The hospital has its own kind of quiet at night. It isn't silence. Silence is something you can settle into. Hospital quiet is layered with machine beeps and distant footsteps and the particular hiss of an HVAC system that runs whether anyone needs it to or not. I lay there in that layered not silence, staring at the ceiling tiles, and I went back. All the way back to October of 1987 when I was 29 years old. And the most terrifying thing in my life was a set of hand-drawn blueprints I wasn't sure I could execute. Dot had sketched the kitchen on a paper napkin at a diner on Route 9. We were eating breakfast after church, and she pulled a pen from her purse and started drawing while I was still working on my eggs. A window above the sink looking out to where the garden would go. A shelf at exactly her height on the east wall. A spot for the flour canister next to the stove because that's where her mother had kept it, and that's where it belonged. "This is what I want," she said, sliding the napkin across to me. I picked it up carefully, the way you handle something that matters. "I can build this," I told her. She smiled at me over her coffee cup. "I know you can, Ray. That's why I drew it. 14 months of overtime shifts and early mornings and calluses on my calluses. I mixed concrete with a rented mixer in the lot next door. I framed the walls myself, squared every corner twice, ran the electrical with my buddy Frank coaching me over the phone because Frank had done it before, and I hadn't. The day I hung the kitchen shelves at exactly Dot's height on the east wall, I drove to her mother's apartment and brought Dot over with her eyes closed, one hand in mine. She opened her eyes. She stood in the kitchen and turned in a slow circle, one hand going to her mouth. Then she started crying, not the sad kind, the overwhelmed kind, the kind that means something landed exactly where it was supposed to. "Ray," she whispered, "you built my dream." "No," I told her. "I built ours." Lying in that hospital bed 38 years later, I thought about Linda at 9 years old sneaking into the garage on weekend mornings to watch me work. She'd drag a 3-legged stool to the corner and sit with her chin in both hands, just watching. One Saturday, she asked me, "Daddy, why do you build things instead of just buying them?" I put down the plane I was using and thought about it for a real minute, the way she deserved. "Because when you build something yourself," I told her, "nobody can take it away." She'd nodded with the gravity of a child storing something important. I had believed that completely when I said it. Lying in the dark 33 years later with a heart monitor recording my every beat, I felt that belief shaking at its foundation in a way I didn't yet have words for. The words would come. Not that night. Tommy came to me differently in those memories. He was never the one watching from the corner. He was the one underfoot handing me the wrong wrench with total confidence, dragging a too heavy board across the floor because he wanted to help and didn't know yet that wanting wasn't the same as ready. He fell asleep in the garage more times than I could count, curled on the old army cot I kept for late nights. One small hand still wrapped around a child-sized hammer we'd bought him at the hardware store. There was a photograph of that on my workshop wall. Tommy at 7, sound asleep, mouth open, the hammer clutched to his chest like a stuffed animal. I had not looked at that photograph the right way in years. I understood that now at midnight in a hospital bed, in the way you understand things when you have no choice but to be still and honest. Tommy had stopped coming to the garage around the time Dot got sick the first time. I told myself it was because he was a teenager. Maybe that was part of it. The other part was that I had stopped inviting him, had gotten so locked into the work of holding everything together that I forgot the work wasn't the point. Dot was the one who held us together with words and presence and the particular warmth of a woman who noticed everything. When she died, we all reached for whatever we had: Linda for control, Tommy for distance, me for the only language I'd ever really trusted, making things with my hands. None of us had been enough. Not even close. The monitor beside me beeped its steady, indifferent rhythm. I closed my eyes and let the memories settle the way sediment settles in still water. I had built something real, something true. I had put 38 years into 4 walls and a kitchen window and a maple tree in the front yard. What I hadn't built, what I was only now beginning to understand I had left unfinished, was something you couldn't measure with a square or a level. I was still working on that thought when I drifted toward sleep. And the last thing I remember before I went under was seeing very clearly behind my eyes Mark's face that afternoon, the way his eyes had moved around my hospital room, measuring, calculating, and the image of my house keys sitting in his palm. I've been a carpenter for 40 years. I know the difference between someone who comes to help and someone who comes to measure. Mark Marsh arrived at 8:40 the next morning with a coffee from the place on Clement Street. The good one, the one that costs too much, and the particular energy of a man who has rehearsed his entrance. He was alone. No Linda. He set the coffee on my tray table, pulled a chair close, and sat with his forearms on his knees, leaning in the way people do when they want to seem like they're really listening. "Linda couldn't make it this morning, Dad," he said. "She sends her love." "That's all right," I said. "How are you feeling?" "You look you look better than I expected." "The doctors seem cautiously optimistic," I said. whatever that means. He laughed the easy laugh of a man who wants you to relax. And that's when I saw it. On the tray table beside the coffee cup he'd brought me, my house keys. The key ring Dot had given me the year we finished the house. A small brass ring with a wooden disc I'd turned on the lathe, our initials burned into it with a soldering iron. R&D. I had not given those keys to Mark. I had not given them to anyone. They lived on the hook by my back door, where they had lived for 38 years. Mark, I said carefully. Where did those come from? He glanced at the keys, like he'd forgotten they were there. Oh, Linda grabbed them. She asked me to stop by the house, pick up a few things you might need. Comfortable clothes, your reading glasses. He smiled. You know how she is. Always thinking ahead. I looked at the keys for a long moment. The wood disc. The burned initials. R and D. Linda did not have a key to my house. I had never given her one. There had been a copy once years, but I'd changed the locks after a misunderstanding in 2019 that we had never fully discussed. If Linda had my keys now, she had gotten them somewhere they shouldn't have been gotten from. That's kind of her, I said. Mark nodded, settling back in his chair with the ease of a man who thinks the hard part is over. Dad, while I have you, I know the timing isn't perfect, and I'm not trying to push anything, but I've been thinking about your situation. Just practically speaking. He paused, arranging his next words. Have you thought about setting up a durable power of attorney? It's just a legal document that lets someone you trust make decisions for you if you're ever not able to. Financial stuff, property management. It's honestly something everyone your age should have. A durable power of attorney. In the state of California, that's a document that authorizes another person to act on your behalf in financial and legal matters, including real estate transactions. Without it, no one can sign anything in your name. With it, the wrong person could sign everything. I have an attorney, I said. Ruth Abrams. She handles all of that. Something moved across Mark's face, fast, almost invisible. A recalculation. Right, good. That's smart. He picked up his coffee. I just want to make sure you're covered. We want to make sure you're covered. There it was again. We. I thought about a conversation I'd had with Dot 4 years before she died. We were sitting on the porch after dinner, and she'd watched Mark's car pull away after a Sunday visit, and said very quietly, Ray, that man doesn't look at our home the way we do. He looks at it the way people look at things they want to own. I had told her she was imagining things. I had kissed her temple and changed the subject. The shame of that moment hit me there in the hospital room, like a physical force, a burning behind my sternum that had nothing to do with my heart, and everything to do with how badly I had underestimated the woman I loved. Mark stood to leave 20 minutes later, satisfied the way a man looks when he thinks a meeting went the way he planned. He patted my shoulder. You just rest, Dad. We'll take care of everything. The door swung shut. I counted to 30. Then I reached for my phone with a hand that was not quite steady, found the contact I needed, and pressed call. Ruth Abrams answered on the second ring. Ruth, I said, I need you to tell me something. The deed to my house, where is it right now? A pause. Then, in my office safe, Raymond, where it's been for 2 years. Why, I exhaled one long, slow breath that fogged slightly in the cool room air. Then I told her about Mark, about the keys, about the power of attorney. I told her everything in the flat, precise way I used to describe structural problems to contractors here. Is what I observed here is what I believe it means. Here is what I need you to do about it. When I finished, Ruth was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said, "Raymond, I'm going to make a call to the county recorder's office this morning. A title alert. If anyone attempts to file any document affecting your property, any document will know within the hour." "Can they do anything with a photocopy of the deed?" "Not at the recorder's office. The title record is what matters, and it has your name on it. But that doesn't mean they won't try." Another pause. "How are you feeling medically?" "Like a man who just figured out he doesn't have as much time as he thought." "Then let's not waste any," Ruth said. I set the phone down on the blanket. Outside the window, the October sky had gone the hard, flat blue it gets in the afternoons, the kind of blue that doesn't apologize for anything. My hands had stopped shaking. There was someone I was realizing who had known what Mark was before I did. She'd told me. She'd left me every tool I needed, and she'd done it from a hospital bed not so different from this one 3 years ago in the last months of her life. Dot. Still 3 steps ahead. I've spent 40 years reading wood grain, knowing where the stress lines are before they split. You learn to see it. A board that looks solid from the outside but runs its grain at the wrong angle, weak along a seam nobody bothered to check. You press your thumb against it and feel the give before it shows. People aren't so different. I had pressed my thumb against Mark Marsh a dozen times over 12 years and told myself the give I felt was just my imagination. Ruth called back at 2:15. "Raymond," she said, and her voice had the particular quality it gets when she's about to deliver facts she wishes weren't facts. "I pulled Mark Marsh's civil court history this morning. There's a filing from 9 years ago in Cuyahoga County, Ohio. A civil fraud claim, specifically forgery of a property transfer document. The plaintiff was a 71-year-old man named Gerald Whitmore. His daughter was married to Mark at the time." My hand tightened around the phone. "What happened to the case?" "Settled out of court. 6 weeks after filing the complaint was withdrawn. No public terms." Ruth paused. "Raymond, the plaintiff's attorney at the time, was listed as having negotiated a confidential resolution, which in my experience means someone got paid to go away. Mark was married before. For approximately 3 years, yes. The marriage ended shortly after the settlement. I lay back against the pillow and stared at the water stain on the ceiling, the one shaped like Ohio, which suddenly felt less like a coincidence and more like the universe making a joke at my expense. Gerald Whitmore, 71 years old, his daughter's husband, his property. I was not the first. "Ruth," I said. "He's done this before. He knew exactly what he was doing when he married Linda." "That is one conclusion," Ruth said carefully. "It's also possible he married Linda for reasons unrelated to your property and developed a separate plan later. Either way, Raymond, the pattern is concerning." "What's his financial situation?" Another pause, longer this time. "I had a colleague run a preliminary search. There's a judgment line filed against Mark Marsh personally in this county 4 months ago. A private lending company called Premier Capital Advisors." She said the number quietly and precisely, the way she said all difficult things. $180,000. The lien has a collection escalation clause, meaning if he doesn't begin substantial repayment within 60 days of filing, they can pursue asset seizure. $180,000. 60 days from 4 months ago meant he had roughly 3 weeks left. "He needs the house," I said. "He needs the money the house would generate," Ruth said. "There's a difference, but yes." I understood then completely, the way you understand a structural failure once you've seen where the load was concentrated. Mark hadn't waited until I was in the hospital to start planning. He'd been building toward this for months, maybe longer. The questions about power of attorney. the casual interest in property values. Linda, who had signed things she didn't fully read, because Mark had always handled the paperwork, and she had slowly, over 12 years, stopped asking why. Linda didn't know all of it. I was certain of that. She was my daughter, difficult and distant and changed by her marriage in ways that still made my chest ache. But she was not capable of the cold calculation I was now seeing clearly in the man she'd chosen. After I hung up with Ruth, I made a second call. Frank DeLuca picked up on the first ring. We've known each other since we were 19 years old, working summers on the same framing crew in the valley. He sold his plumbing business 2 years ago for more money than either of us ever imagined 2 kids from the same block could accumulate. He'd been restless ever since calling me on Saturday mornings, complaining that retirement made him feel like a show dog with nowhere to run. "Me, Ray," he said. "What's going on? You sound like you're calling from a hospital." "I am calling from a hospital." "What?" His voice sharpened immediately. "What happened? Are you okay?" "Heart attack. Minor one." "I'm fine, Frank. Listen to me. I need a favor, a significant one." A beat. Then, "Ray, you've known me 40 years. Have I ever said no to you?" "Once. When I asked you to help me move that piano." He laughed short and real. "The piano weighed 400 pounds and you lived on the 3rd floor. That was self-preservation, not refusal." His voice settled back into seriousness. "What do you need?" I told him about Mark, about the deed, about Premier Capital and the 60-day window and the house being listed for sale, while I lay in a bed unable to do anything about it through normal channels. I told him what I needed him to do: contact the listing, present himself as a cash buyer, use the LLC he'd kept active after selling the business. Get inside the transaction. See what Mark was actually filing, what documents he was using, what he said when he thought he was talking to someone who wanted to give him money. Frank was quiet for a moment after I finished. "You want me to pretend to buy your house?" he said. "I want you to make Mark think you're going to buy my house. There's a difference." Another beat. Then Frank DeLuca, my friend of 40 years, said, "About time someone put a stop to this. I'll call the listing agent tomorrow morning." I set the phone down and felt something shift inside me, not the cardiac kind of shift, the other kind. The kind that happens when you stop being the person things are happening to and start being the person making things happen. Outside my window, the afternoon had gone amber and long. Somewhere across the city, Mark Marsh was planning his next move. He didn't know I'd already made mine. My youngest son has his mother's eyes and his own set of excuses. I've been making peace with that combination for 38 years, with varying degrees of success. Tommy sent 2 more texts that afternoon. The first arrived at 3:40. "Hey, Dad, seriously, the doctors are taking good care of you, right? Like you're in good hands." The second came 11 minutes later, before I'd had a chance to respond to the first. "Also, I got this business opportunity I've been looking into, super solid. I just need a small investment to get started. Linda said maybe you'd help out when you're feeling better. No pressure." I read them twice. Then I set the phone on the tray table face down and looked at the ceiling for a while. Linda said maybe you'd help. They had talked about me, about money, about what I might provide. While I was in a hospital bed with electrodes on my chest, my 2 children had discussed my wallet. Nurse Carol came in to check my vitals at 4 o'clock and found me staring at nothing in particular with an expression she apparently didn't like. She took my blood pressure, looked at the reading, and said, "Mr. Holt, whatever you're thinking about right now, I need you to think about something else, such as anything with a lower blood pressure reading attached to it." She had a point. I tried to think about the maple tree in the front yard. It helped a little. What I didn't know until later, until Tommy told me himself, on a night that hadn't happened yet, with his hands shaking and his voice lower than I'd ever heard it, was what had occurred that same afternoon 3 miles from the hospital at a coffee shop on Birchwood Avenue. Mark had called Tommy that morning and asked him to meet. Tommy had gone because Tommy rarely said no to anyone who sounded confident enough asking. Mark arrived 10 minutes late, ordered for both of them without asking what Tommy wanted, and set a white envelope on the table between their coffee cups. "I need a favor," Mark said. Tommy looked at the envelope. "What kind of favor?" "Just don't call your dad every hour. Let things settle. There's some family stuff being sorted out. It's better if Raymond stays calm, doesn't get phone calls stirring him up." Mark slid the envelope closer. "Consider it a thank you in advance." Tommy told me later that he picked the envelope up and looked inside it. $3,000 in 50s and hundreds, the way money looks when someone has counted it out deliberately to seem like a lot. "What family stuff?" Tommy asked. "Just paperwork. You know how complicated things get at his age. Linda and I are handling it." Tommy said he sat with the envelope in his hands for what felt like a long time but was probably 4 seconds. He said he thought about calling me right then, putting the envelope back, walking out. He said he thought about all of that, and then he put the money in his jacket pocket and told himself it was fine, that it was family business, that Mark probably knew what he was doing. He didn't call me that evening. Instead, he went to a restaurant downtown and ordered the steak he'd been eyeing on the menu for months, and he took a photograph of it to post on Instagram. He typed out a caption. His thumb hovered over this button. Then he put the phone down on the table. He didn't post the picture. He sat in the restaurant alone with the steak and the envelope in his jacket, and the silence of a choice he was already starting to regret, and he didn't taste a thing he ate. That was the first crack. He wouldn't tell me that for days. But Nurse Carol found me that evening in better spirits than my 4 o'clock blood pressure had predicted. And when she asked what had changed, I told her I'd been thinking about my younger son. "Is he coming to visit?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "But I think he will." She raised an eyebrow, the expression of a woman who has heard optimistic fathers make predictions about their children for 25 years of bedside nursing. "He's got his mother's eyes," I said. "She always came around eventually." Nurse Carol pulled the curtain back on her way out. Through the window, the city had gone fully dark. The lights of the valley spread out below the hospital hill like something scattered and glittering. Somewhere down there, Tommy was sitting with a choice that was already eating him from the inside. Somewhere else, Mark was counting on the fact that I didn't know any of this. He was wrong on both counts. He just didn't know it yet. I've signed a lot of documents in my life. Building permits, mortgage renewals. Dot's hospital forms the last year of her life, pages and pages of her name and my name together on things I wished we didn't have to sign. I know what a signature is supposed to feel like. And I know what mine looks like better than anyone left alive, because Dot was the only other person who ever studied it, the way she studied everything about me quietly and completely, without ever making me feel examined. My R starts from the bottom. Always has. A habit I picked up from my father, who learned it from his. The loop goes up and right, then the tail drops back down before the A completes the arc. It is distinctive enough that Ruth once told me it would be difficult to fake convincingly. Not impossible. Difficult. Linda arrived at 9:15 Tuesday morning, carrying a tote bag from the farmer's market. Apples, a container of soup, a paperback she'd chosen because the cover looked peaceful. She set everything on the tray table and kissed my cheek and asked how I'd slept. And for 20 minutes, she was my daughter again, asking about my medication schedule, talking to Nurse Carol about the meal plan, complaining gently that the room was too cold and could something be done about it. I watched her, and felt the particular ache of a man who loves someone and cannot reach them anymore. "Linda," I said during a lull, "how did Mark get my house keys?" She looked up from the soup container she'd been opening. Something moved across her face, quick and complicated. "What do you mean?" "He had them yesterday morning. My key ring. The one with the wooden disc. He must have. I probably gave them to him." She set the container down. "For the house checks. Someone needs to go in, make sure the heat's running right, water the plants. You know how you are about the plants." "Linda, you don't have a key to my house." The color in her cheeks shifted. "Dad, I changed the locks in 2019, you know that." She picked up a plastic spoon and put it down again. "I found a spare in your junk drawer when we were there last month for dinner. I made a copy just in case something happened." "I wasn't trying to—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I was trying to be responsible." I looked at my daughter for a long moment, at the set of her jaw, which was Dot's jaw, at the way her hands moved when she was uncomfortable straightening things that didn't need straightening. "All right," I said. She exhaled. "Dad, I just want to make sure you're taken care of." "I know," I said, and I let her believe I did. After Linda left, Nurse Carol appeared in the doorway with an expression I was beginning to recognize, the one that meant she had information she wasn't sure how to deliver. "Mr. Holt," she said, stepping inside and pulling the door mostly closed behind her. "Someone called the nurses' station this morning, before your daughter arrived. A woman, she said she was your daughter, but it wasn't the same voice as the woman who just left." Nurse Carol met my eyes directly. "She asked if you were conscious and coherent enough to sign documents. She wanted to know if a notary could come to the room." My stomach dropped straight through the mattress. What did you tell her?" "I told her visiting hours start at 9 and that I couldn't provide information about patients over the phone." Nurse Carol paused. "Then I wrote down the time and the number it came from. In case you wanted it." She handed me a slip of paper. The number was a cell phone, not Linda's, not one I recognized. I handed it to Ruth 40 minutes later when she called to check in, and Ruth ran it in the time it took me to drink half a cup of coffee. It traced to a notary service in the East Valley that had been flagged twice in the past 3 years for irregular filings. "A Ramon," Ruth said, and her voice had gone very precise, the way it does when she is controlling her reaction deliberately. "They were going to bring someone to your room. Someone with a seal. If you had been disoriented enough, or medicated enough, or simply pressured enough." "But I wasn't," I said. "But you weren't," she agreed. "And the title alert is active as of this morning. Any document filed against your property address will trigger an immediate notification to my office." She paused. "I also want to explain something clearly, Raymond. In California, a deed transfer requires the grantor, that's you, to sign in front of a licensed notary public who verifies your identity in person. A photocopy of a deed has no legal standing at the county recorder's office. What they would need is either your actual signature obtained by whatever means or a forged signature convincing enough to pass a notary's scrutiny. And a notary willing to look the other way," I said. "That is the second component, yes." Ruth let that settle, which is why they called the hospital. I lay there after we hung up and thought about the particular coldness of that. Not anger, something past anger. The clarity that comes when you finally see the shape of a thing you've been trying not to look at directly. They had called the hospital to find out if I was vulnerable enough. Nurse Carol was at the door when I looked up. "You doing okay?" "Better than they were counting on," I said. She nodded once, firm, like that was the correct answer. "Good. Keep it that way. There is a particular kind of surprise that doesn't feel like surprise at all. It feels like something clicking into place, a joint fitting correctly, a drawer sliding home after years of sticking. You didn't know anything was missing until it suddenly isn't anymore. I was trying to read the paperback Linda had brought, a thriller about a woman who fakes her own death, which under the circumstances was not the most relaxing choice. When the door opened and a girl walked in with a backpack that was clearly too heavy for her, and 3 textbooks tucked under one arm, and the particular expression of someone who has decided to do something and is not going to be talked out of it. She was 16 years old. She had Dot's posture, straight back, chin level, the bearing of a woman who occupies space without apology. She had Mark's coloring, which was the one thing I would have changed if I'd had any say in the matter. But her eyes were her own, steady and brown, and older than 16 had any right to be. Gracie set the textbooks on the chair, dropped the backpack beside it, with a thud that rattled the tray table, and sat down. "I told Mom I had study group," she said without preamble or apology. "She didn't ask which one." My throat tightened in a way that had nothing to do with medication. "How did you get here?" "Bus. 35 minutes. It's not bad." She pulled a pencil from behind her ear and opened one of the textbooks. "I figured you probably had enough people asking how you're feeling in a way that means they don't actually want an answer. So I'm just going to do my homework, and you can watch TV or whatever." I did not watch TV. I watched my granddaughter work through a calculus problem set with the focused ferocity of a person who takes things seriously, and I felt something loosen in my chest that had been wound tight for days. After 20 minutes, she looked up. "Are you staring at me?" "Probably," I said. She almost smiled. "You okay?" "Better than I was an hour ago." She nodded and went back to her calculus. The room felt different with her in it, warmer somehow, the machine beeps less insistent. Nurse Carol looked in once and raised both eyebrows at me over Gracie's head. I shrugged. She grinned and kept walking. A while later, Gracie set her pencil down and looked at me with an expression that meant she'd been working up to something. "Grandpa," she said, "did Grandma Dot know she was your favorite person?" The question landed somewhere soft and deep. I looked at my hands, the knuckles, the calluses, the scar on my right thumb from a circular saw in 1994 that Dot had wrapped in a dish towel and driven me to urgent care, cursing the whole way. "I hope so," I said. I should have said it more. Gracie was quiet for a moment, turning her pencil end over end. "She kept every card you ever wrote her," she said. "Even the ones with the terrible handwriting. She had a shoebox. I found it once when I was little in her closet. She caught me looking and didn't even get mad. She just sat down on the floor next to me and read them out loud." Gracie's voice went slightly rougher. "She laughed at all your jokes, even the bad ones." My eyes burned sudden and sharp. I looked at the ceiling until the feeling passed enough to speak. "She was always too generous with me." "I don't think so," Gracie said firmly. "I think she knew exactly what she had." We sat with that for a moment that felt earned rather than empty. Then my phone buzzed on the tray table, Walter Kowalski calling from next door. "Ray." His voice was low and deliberate, the voice he used in chess when he'd seen 3 moves ahead. "There's a moving truck at your house. They've been unloading for 2 hours. And there's a sign out front. For sale by owner. Hand-lettered, looks like it went up this morning." My jaw tightened. Gracie looked up from her textbook. She could read a face, that girl, same as her grandmother. "Walter," I said. "Are you filming?" "Just have been since the truck showed up. License plates, faces, everything. I've got a neighbor's kid helping me. He's got a better phone camera than mine." "Good. Don't stop." I paused. "Is the maple still there?" "A beat." "Yeah, Ray. Still there." Good, I said. "Keep filming." I set the phone down. Gracie was watching me with those steady brown eyes. "What's happening?" she asked. "Something I'm going to need your help with," I said. "But not today. Today you finish your calculus." She studied me for a long moment, the way Dot used to, deciding whether to push or to wait. Then she picked up her pencil. "Okay," she said. "But tomorrow I want the whole story." She had no idea yet how much of it she was already part of. Before I tell you what Gracie brought with her that Friday morning, and what I found when I looked at it, drop a 9 in the comments so I know you're still here with me. A note: this story contains fictional elements woven in for storytelling purposes. If that's not for you, this is a good place to step away, no hard feelings at all. My granddaughter is 16 years old and has never taken a real estate law class in her life. What she has done every birthday, every Christmas, every Father's Day, since she was old enough to hold a pen, is watch me sign my name. Birthday cards, permission slips for her school trips, the occasional check when she needed something, and her parents were unavailable. 16 years of watching my signature. She knew it better than she knew it. She came back Friday morning without the calculus textbooks, just her phone screen first against her palm, and an expression that was working very hard to stay neutral and not quite managing it. "Grandpa," she said, sitting down and setting the phone on the tray table between us. "Last night I saw some papers on the kitchen table. Dad left them out when he went to take a call. I don't know exactly what they mean, but something felt wrong. So I took pictures." She turned the phone toward me. 14 photographs shot quickly, but clearly she'd steadied her hand on the table edge for each one the way I'd taught her to hold a level. Every page sharp, every line readable. I picked up the phone. The first document was a durable power of attorney naming Mark Marsh as agent with full authority over real property transactions. My name on the signature line. My address in the header. My signature, except it wasn't. I've looked at my own handwriting for 72 years. I know the way my R drops before it rises, the way my H leans exactly 4 degrees to the right. The slight hesitation before the final T in Holt that leaves a microscopic ink pool any examiner would recognize. The signature on that document started the R from the top. The H stood perfectly upright. The T ended clean. It was a good forgery. Not good enough. "Gracie," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "How many pages did you photograph?" 14. I got all of them. I deleted the photos off the camera roll and moved them to a folder Dad doesn't know I have. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, and for a moment she looked so much like Dot, making a case for something that my chest ached with it. "Grandpa, the date on those papers, I looked it up. That was the day you came into the hospital, the day you were in intensive care. I looked at the date stamp on the third document, October 6th, the morning Walter had called 911 in my garage. I had been in the emergency room before noon under monitoring with an IV in my arm and electrodes on my chest. I had not signed anything. I had not been in any condition to sign anything. Any notary present for that signature had either not been present at all or had been willing to certify something they knew was false. "You did good, sweetheart," I said. I handed the phone back to her carefully, like it was evidence, because it was. "You did real good." Her composure cracked just slightly at the edges. "Grandpa, is Mom in trouble?" I set the phone down and looked at my granddaughter, really looked at her the way I should have been looking at all of them for years. The worry lines between her brows. The way she'd folded her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. "Your mom made some choices that are going to have consequences," I said. "But the worst of what's happening that came from somewhere else. From someone who was supposed to protect this family, not use it." Gracie's jaw tightened. "Dad." "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." She looked at the window for a moment, the October sky going gray with the particular flatness that comes before rain. Then she looked back at me. Grandpa, I don't want to be like them. I need you to know I'm not like that. I reached over and put my hand over both of hers. Her knuckles were white from pressing her own hands together. Gracie. The fact that you're sitting here, that you took those pictures and brought them to me instead of pretending you didn't see anything, that tells me exactly who you are. You don't have anything to prove to me. Her eyes filled. She blinked hard twice and would not let them spill. So much like Dot. Dot never cried easily either. She saved it for the things that actually deserved it. I called Ruth while Gracie was in the bathroom washing her face. I forwarded the photographs one by one, watching the progress bar on each file. Ruth was quiet for 11 seconds after the last one came through. I counted. Raymond Hodau, she said finally. The notary seal on document 3, I'm looking at it now. That license number doesn't appear in the California Notary Public Database. It's fabricated. Another pause. And the signature itself, even without a handwriting expert, the date alone makes this criminal. You were admitted to the ICU at 11:47 a.m. on October 6th. This document is time-stamped 2:15 p.m. the same day. What does that mean legally? It means whoever submitted this committed felony forgery under California Penal Code Section 470. It means elder financial abuse under Welfare and Institutions Code Section 15610-30 sir, which carries enhanced penalties because you are over 65, and it means that every document in that stack is void. Ruth's voice had gone very quiet, and very certain, the way it does when she has stopped thinking through a problem and started solving it. Raymond, this is criminal, not civil. This goes beyond a property dispute. I know, I said. Are you ready for what comes next? I looked at the door to my room, the small rectangle of hallway visible through the gap, the ordinary sounds of an ordinary hospital afternoon beyond it. I've been ready, I said, since the morning I watched my house get smaller through the back window of an ambulance. When Gracie came back, her eyes were dry and her chin was level. She sat back down and picked up her phone. So, she said. What do we do now? Now, when I said we wait for Walter, Dot was the kind of woman who thought 3 steps ahead of everyone in the room. I knew that when I married her. I'd known it since our second date, when she'd mentioned, almost in passing, that she'd already looked into the parking situation at the restaurant I hadn't yet told her I was taking her to. I'd stared at her across the table and thought, this woman is going to be smarter than me for the rest of my life. And somehow that felt like the best news I'd ever received. She was still 3 steps ahead of everyone in the room. Even now. Even from 3 years gone. Walter arrived at 7:40 that evening with 2 coffees from the vending machine down the hall, the kind that comes out lukewarm and slightly too sweet, the kind neither of us would have touched under normal circumstances. He set one in front of me and one in front of himself. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a plain brown envelope on the tray table. Then he set a 3rd coffee beside it. I looked at the 3rd cup. Walter looked at the window. Neither of us needed to explain it. 22 years of Saturday mornings. 3 cups on the porch rail, rain or shine, Dot carrying them out with both hands and setting them down with the particular care of a woman who understood that small rituals were how people stayed connected to each other. After she died, I still put 3 cups out every week. Walter never mentioned it. He just drank his coffee and let me have mine. Tonight he'd bought 3 from a vending machine and said nothing. That was the whole of it. That was enough. She gave it to me about 2 months before she passed, Walter said, nodding at the envelope. His voice was rougher than usual, scraped down to the grain. Said give this to Ray when he needs it most. Said I'd know when. He cleared his throat. I think that's now. My hands were not quite steady when I reached for it. The envelope was sealed with the kind of care Dot put into everything. Edges pressed flat, flap, folded twice. My name on the front in her handwriting. Not Raymond. Not Ray. Just my husband. The way she'd written it on cards for 40 years. I opened it slowly. Inside were 3 things. The first was a sheet of notepaper. Dot's blue ink cursive, the handwriting I could have identified in a stadium of 10,000 documents. I unfolded it and read it in the particular quiet of a hospital room at night, with the monitor counting out my heartbeats and Walter sitting across from me pretending to look at his phone. She had written, Ray, if you're reading this, something happened that I hoped wouldn't but planned for anyway. You know how I am. I need you to open the other 2 things before you read the rest of this letter. In order. That matters. I almost smiled. Instructions, even now. The second item was a folded piece of paper, old, the creases soft from years of careful storage. I opened it, and my breath stopped entirely. It was a paper napkin. The diner on Route 9, the one we'd gone to after church in the spring of 1986, the morning Dot pulled a pen from her purse and started sketching while I was still eating my eggs. The kitchen window above the sink. The shelf at her height on the east wall. The spot for the flour canister next to the stove. She had kept it. 40 years. Pressed flat in the back of a drawer somewhere, moved from house to house, from healthy years into sick ones, saved with the same intentionality she brought to everything she loved. My throat closed completely. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth and held it there until I could breathe correctly again. Walter set his phone down and looked at the ceiling. He had the good grace not to say a single word. The third item was a legal document. 4 pages formally typed, signed by both of us. I saw my own signature and recognized it immediately, the real one R rising from the bottom H, leaning its honest 4 degrees. Dot had signed below mine in the blue ink she always used. It was a revocable living trust. In California, a living trust is a legal arrangement where assets, including real property, are transferred into the trust during the owner's lifetime. The trust document names a trustee to manage those assets and a beneficiary to receive them. Because the property is owned by the trust, rather than by an individual, it bypasses probate entirely and cannot be touched by creditors of the individual owners. Dot and I had signed this together 2 months before she died. The house, our house, the one I had built from a napkin sketch and 40 years of Saturday mornings, was held in trust for Gracie, our granddaughter. Not to be transferred, sold, or encumbered without the signature of the trustee. The trustee was Ruth Abrams. I read the letter then. All of it. Dot had written, I didn't tell you because I knew you'd say it wasn't necessary. You always think the best of people, Ray. Even the ones who've shown you exactly who they are. That's one of the things I love most about you, and one of the things that scares me most. So I took care of it. The house goes to Gracie. It always should have. She has your hands and my stubbornness, and she's going to do something wonderful with both. Don't let anyone take what we built. I'll be very annoyed if you do. I was laughing by the end of it. Laughing with tears running down the side of my face into the pillow, which is an undignified way to receive the best news of a terrible week, but there it was. Walter looked over. Good news. The best kind, I said. The kind your wife arranged 3 years ago because she knew you'd need it. Walter picked up his coffee cup, raised it slightly. I raised mine. We drank the terrible vending machine coffee. The third cup sat between us on the tray table, cooling quietly exactly where it was supposed to be. Frank DeLuca has never been a patient man. In 40 years of friendship, I have watched him sand a cabinet door with the focused intensity of a surgeon drive a nail with the precision of someone who has done it 10,000 times, and then turn around and absolutely refuse to wait in line for more than 4 minutes at any establishment on earth. He is excellent at the work and constitutionally incapable of the waiting. It is the central tension of his personality, and it has served him well in the trades where the work never stops and patience is for other people. What I asked him to do, play a cash buyer move slowly, let Mark come to him rather than pushing, was the hardest thing I could have requested of Frank DeLuca. He did it perfectly. He called me Saturday morning from the parking lot outside Sandra Reyes's office, keeping his voice low. "I just got out of the meeting," he said. "Ray, this woman is good. She's been doing this 20 years, and she is not comfortable with this listing. I could see it in her face the whole time. What did she show you?" "Power of attorney document. Authorization to sell. Both signed by Raymond Holt," she said. A pause. "The signature looked wrong to me. I've seen you sign your name 100 times at poker tables, and I know your R doesn't start from the top." I didn't say anything, just nodded and asked about the inspection history. "Good. What did Mark send her for the listing?" "Full packet. Authorization documents, property description photos he took. Himself, the maple, came out nice, by the way. Full fall color, asking price about $40,000. Under what comparable properties are running in your neighborhood?" Frank's voice tightened. "He needs this to close fast, Ray. The price says he's not negotiating. He wants someone to say yes before anyone asks questions." Sandra Reyes had taken the meeting because Frank's LLC DeLuca Property Holdings registered 2 years ago when he sold the plumbing business, and his accountant told him to keep a vehicle for future investments, had presented itself as exactly the kind of clean, uncomplicated cash buyer that desperate sellers dream about. No financing contingency. No extended inspection period. Ready to close in 30 days. Mark had responded to Frank's inquiry within 40 minutes of the email landing. "He's scared," Frank said. "Scared people move fast and check slowly. He sent me every document in the packet without me asking twice. Which means you have everything. Forwarded to Ruth's office 11 minutes ago." Frank paused. "Ray, there's something else." I asked Sandra very casually, just curiosity from a buyer doing his homework, when the current owner had last been in the property. She gave me to look. Another pause. Then she excused herself and made a phone call. She was gone 12 minutes. When she came back, she told me she needed to verify some details before we proceeded, and she'd be in touch. "She called me," I said. "About 30 minutes ago." "Yeah, I figured. She's going to do the right thing. You can tell." Frank's voice shifted quieter, more direct. "How are you holding up? Better than yesterday." That's not a high bar, but I'll take it. I heard him get into his car, the door closing. "Ray, I want you to know something. When you called me from that hospital room, I wasn't doing you a favor. You've been doing me favors for 40 years. This is me finally being useful. Don't thank me." "I wasn't going to," I said. "Good." A beat. "Call me the minute you need me there in person." Sandra Reyes called back 40 minutes after Frank and I hung up. She introduced herself properly this time, 22 years in residential real estate, licensed in California, member of the local association's ethics board, which was why she said she could not in good conscience continue with the current listing without speaking directly to the property owner. "Mr. Holt," she said, "I've been doing this long enough to know when something isn't right. The signature on your power of attorney is the first thing. The second is the date October 6th. I pulled the county property records this morning and cross-referenced the notarization date with publicly available information. You were admitted to the hospital on October 6th. Before noon, I said. A sharp intake of breath. The document is time-stamped 2:15 p.m. Yes, no, Mr. Holt. Her voice had gone very careful and very deliberate, the voice of someone choosing each word. I am withdrawing from this listing effective immediately. I'm also required by California law to report suspected real estate fraud to the Department of Real Estate. I want you to know that before I do it. I'm glad you called first, I said, and I want you to know what you're doing right now took courage. Thank you. A pause on her end. Then, I hope things work out for you, Mr. Holt. It sounds like you built something worth protecting. By afternoon, the story had moved through the neighborhood, the way news moves through places where people have lived side by side for decades, fast, specific, and attached to names. Mark had posted the listing publicly on every platform available to him. Anyone who knew my address had seen it. By 3 o'clock, my phone had received 11 text messages from people I hadn't spoken to in months. Jim Kowalski, Walter's son, 38 years old, who had grown up watching his father and me play chess on Saturday mornings, texted to say he was parked in front of my house and intended to stay there until further notice. Barbara from 2 doors down sent a text that said only, "We see what's happening, we're here." A man named Gerald, who I had helped reshingle his garage roof in 2019 and who had never in 4 years found a way to adequately thank me for it, showed up at the hospital with a container of chili and the information that he had photographed the moving truck's license plate the day it arrived. I looked at that last message for a long time. 22 years in one place. 22 years of borrowed tools and shared driveways and knowing which houses had dogs and which had bad drainage and whose kids had grown up into good people. You don't always notice that accumulating. You don't always see what you've built in a neighborhood until the neighborhood shows up. I called Walter. Did you know about this? About what? Jim, Barbara, Gerald, and the chili. A pause. Then Walter said, with the particular satisfaction of a man who has made a good move 3 turns in advance, I may have mentioned what was going on to a few people. Walter, you would have done the same. I set the phone down and looked out the hospital window at the city below, lit up and ordinary, and completely unaware that somewhere in it, a 72-year-old man in a hospital bed was feeling for the first time in a very bad week something that was not quite hope, but was close enough to keep him upright. Wednesday was coming. And so was I. I wasn't there that night. I need to say that clearly, because everything I'm about to tell you came to me secondhand, from Gracie sitting in my garage 6 weeks later, with sawdust on her sleeve and a mug of coffee going cold beside her, telling me what she'd seen from the top of the stairs. She told it the way she does everything straight without decoration, watching my face to see if I could handle it. I could. Mostly. Linda could not sleep. Gracie heard her at 1:50 in the morning footsteps crossing the hall, the particular creak of the 4th stair that I'd been meaning to fix since 2011 and never got to because Dot said she liked it, said it told her where everyone was in the house. Gracie got up and looked through the crack in her door. Her mother was going downstairs. She waited 5 minutes. Then she followed. Linda was standing at the kitchen counter with the kettle on, and she was making tea the way her mother made tea, water heated to just below boiling. Not a full boil poured over loose leaves in the small ceramic strainer Dot had used for 30 years. Not a tea bag. The strainer, which was in the cabinet above the sink where Dot had always kept it where it had been kept since the day I built that cabinet at exactly Dot's height on the east wall. Gracie told me she didn't even think about it. She just went straight to the right cabinet, like she'd done it 1,000 times. A pause. I think she had. When she was little. Before everything. Linda sat down in the chair on the left side of the table. Dot's chair, the one that faced the window. The one Dot had sat in every morning for 30 years to watch the light come up over the garden. Linda wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at the window. Outside, there was nothing to see. October darkness, the garden shapeless and dark. But she looked anyway. Gracie stood at the bottom of the stairs and watched her mother sit in her grandmother's chair and drink her grandmother's tea and look at the window her grandfather had built, because her grandmother had drawn it on a napkin. She said she almost went back upstairs. Almost. Then Linda stood up to refill the kettle, and her elbow caught the edge of the shelf above the counter, the shelf I'd built at Dot's height, and a small book slid off the end and fell open on the floor. Gracie recognized it before Linda picked it up. She'd seen it before years ago in the closet upstairs. Dot's journal, the one with the green cloth cover, the elastic band worn smooth from years of being stretched and released. Linda picked it up, started to close it, then stopped. Gracie said her mother stood there for a long time, long enough that the kettle began to whistle, and Linda didn't move to take it off. Gracie went and turned it off herself, and Linda didn't even register the sound. She was reading. Her lips moved slightly the way they had when she was a child, reading to herself, a habit Dot had tried for years to break and eventually accepted as simply Linda. When Linda finally looked up, her eyes were swollen and her cheeks were wet in the way that happens when someone has been crying without realizing it, the slow kind, the kind that doesn't ask permission. "What does it say?" I asked Gracie when she told me this. Gracie looked at her coffee. "The last page," she showed me later. It said, she stopped, cleared her throat. It said Linda has her father's hands, steady and strong. I just hope she uses them to build, not to take. The words hit me somewhere I hadn't expected. I had to look away for a moment at the cabinet door. I was sanding at the grain of the wood, at something that didn't require me to feel quite so much all at once. Mom stood there and read that. Gracie continued. And then she folded, like something went out of her. She sat back down in Grandma's chair and she put her face in her hands and she cried. Not quiet. Actually cried. I've never heard my mother cry like that. Gracie's own voice had gone rough at the edges. She took a sip of cold coffee and grimaced and kept going. I went in. I sat down across from her. She didn't tell me to go back to bed. She looked at me, and she said I made a terrible mistake. Not about the house, about everything. Gracie set down the mug. Then she said, "Your grandfather is a good man." Like she was reminding herself. Like she'd forgotten. Linda Holt Marsh had grown up in the house that her father built with his own hands, from a napkin sketch and 14 months of overtime. She had grown up watching him work and learning what it meant to make something real. Somewhere along the way, across 12 years and a marriage to a man who looked at things only to calculate their value, she had drifted so far from that understanding that she'd needed her dead mother's handwriting on a fall kitchen floor to find her way back to it. Gracie went back to bed around 3. Linda stayed at the table until the sky outside the garden window began to lighten. Watching the dark turn gray turn to the particular pale gold of an October dawn in a house her father had built, facing exactly the right direction to catch it. She called me the next morning. The first call she'd made that wasn't about paperwork or logistics or managing a situation. She called because she had something to say that couldn't wait. Gracie didn't say good morning. She walked in Sunday at 9:15 with her phone already unlocked, and her jaw set in the particular way that meant she had been awake for a while and had been thinking hard enough that sleep had simply stopped being relevant. She sat down, placed the phone face up on the tray table between us, and said, "I need to show you something I found last night." I pushed myself up against the pillow. "Show me." She had been on LinkedIn. That was where it started. She'd searched Mark's name after lying awake thinking about the papers she'd photographed, trying to understand what kind of person planned something like this, carefully enough to have a forged notary seal ready to use. Mark's LinkedIn profile was mostly unremarkable: 15 years in property management, a stretch in Ohio she'd never heard him mention, a gap of about 8 months that the profile skipped over cleanly. The gap bothered her. She clicked through his former employer. The company Lakeview Property Solutions, Columbus, Ohio, had dissolved 9 years ago. She searched the company name plus the word dissolved and found a local Ohio business news item. She searched Mark's name plus the company name. That search returned a court filing index from Cuyahoga County. She handed me the phone. Civil complaint. Plaintiff Gerald Whitmore, age 71, Columbus, Ohio. Defendant Mark Allen Marsh. Nature of claim: fraudulent transfer of real property, forgery of power of attorney document. Filed 9 years ago. Status withdrawn 6 weeks after filing parties reached private settlement. I read it twice. Then I handed the phone back and looked at my granddaughter, who had found this at 2 in the morning on a Sunday because something wouldn't let her sleep. Gerald Whitmore, I said. Did you find anything else about him? He had a daughter. Married name was Marsh. Gracie's voice was even and deliberate, the way it gets when she's controlling something underneath it. They divorced about a year after the settlement. I couldn't find any more than that. I had already known this from Ruth. But hearing it from Gracie, watching her piece it together herself, watching her arrive at the same place Ruth's investigative work had taken days to reach and arrived there before 9 in the morning on a Sunday, made it land differently. Made it feel less like information and more like a verdict. Grandpa, Gracie said. He did this before. To someone exactly like you. I know. Her composure cracked down the middle fast and clean, like a board splitting along the grain. Her eyes flooded, and she pressed both hands flat on the tray table, and her voice went ragged. How does someone do that? How does a person just decide that another family's home is something they can take, that a 71-year-old man is someone they can? She stopped, pressed her lips together hard. Gracie, I'm fine, she said tightly, which is what people say when they are the opposite of fine, but refuse to be otherwise. You don't have to be fine right now, I said. This is worth being upset about. She pulled in a long breath through her nose and let it out slowly. Her hands flattened harder against the table. Then she looked up. Is Mom going to be okay? That question cost her something to ask. I could see it in the effort it took her to hold my gaze while she waited for the answer. Your mom is going to be okay, I said. She made choices she's going to have to live with for a while. But she's not the one who built this plan. She got carried along by someone who was very good at making people think they were choosing freely when they weren't. I paused. Your grandmother knew something was wrong with Mark years before any of us would admit it. She tried to tell me. I didn't listen well enough. Gracie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, one quick, decisive swipe. Grandma was always right. She really was, I agreed. It was occasionally inconvenient. That got me a sound that was almost a laugh. Not quite. Close enough. I called Ruth while Gracie stepped out to get us both coffee from the machine down the hall. Ruth had the Cuyahoga County filing already. She'd found it 3 days earlier through a professional record search, but the additional detail Gracie had turned up about the company dissolution and the timeline helped her build a cleaner picture of the pattern. To Raymond, Ruth said, I want to be direct with you about where we are. The criminal forgery case is solid. The fabricated notary, the date discrepancy, Walter's video footage, Frank's documented communications, Sandra's testimony. What I'm working on now is making sure we have a complete record of the financial fraud component as well. The Ohio case establishes a pattern of behavior which is relevant to both prosecution and any civil action. What about the house itself, the trust? The Revocable Living Trust is ironclad. No transfer occurred. The title alert stopped any county recording. The house is exactly where it was when Dot and you signed that document. Gracie is the named beneficiary. Nothing Mark filed has any legal standing. A pause. He essentially committed multiple felonies for paperwork that accomplished nothing because he didn't know about the trust. There was something almost satisfying about that in a way I didn't entirely feel good about feeling. Ruth, I said. Wednesday. Can we do this? Wednesday. Frank is ready. Walter has his footage organized. Sandra has given a written statement. I've drafted everything we need. Her voice was steady and certain. Wednesday morning, Raymond, 10 o'clock. I'll be there, I said. When Gracie came back with 2 cups of machine coffee, she'd gotten used to them, which said something about how many mornings she'd spent in this room. She set one in front of me and sat down and looked at me with those dot eyes and said, Well, Wednesday, I said. 10 in the morning. She wrapped both hands around her cup, nodded once slowly, the nod of someone filing information away for later. Then she said, Do you want me there? I looked at my granddaughter, 16 years old, 35 minutes on a bus every morning, 14 photographs taken steadily in the dark. A civil complaint found at 2 in the morning because something in her wouldn't let the wrongness of it go unexamined. Yes, I said. I want you there. She nodded again, drank her coffee, and the Sunday morning hospital quiet settled around us like something earned. My phone rang at 10:15 that evening. Tommy. Not a text. A call. I looked at the screen for one full ring before I picked up my heart, doing something complicated in my chest that the monitor noted and then let go. The thing about Tommy's voice when he's scared is that it goes quiet. Not soft quiet. Lower than usual, pulled in like he's trying to take up less space in the world until the scary thing passes. I'd heard that voice when he was 7 and broke the garage window with a baseball and came to tell me. I'd heard it at 22 when he called from a highway median to say he'd had a fender bender and was he in trouble. I hadn't heard it in years because we hadn't talked about anything that mattered in years, but I recognized it immediately when he said my name. Dad. Quiet. Pulled in. Can I come? I'll be here, I said. He arrived at 11:15. He was wearing a jacket I didn't recognize new, the kind that costs money he probably didn't have, and his face had the particular gray quality of someone who had been drinking earlier in the evening and then stopped because something had cut through it. He sat down in the chair beside my bed and looked at his hands. Dad, he said. Mark gave me money, $3,000, to not check in on you too much. He looked up. I took it. I know, I said. His head came up fast. You knew. I didn't know for certain. But I know Mark. And I know you. Tommy stared at me. He opened his mouth and closed it. His eyes were red at the rims, the kind of red that comes from hours of feeling something you can't put down. I didn't know what he was doing, Dad. He said it was family business, that things were complicated and it was better if you stayed calm and rested. I told myself it was true because... He stopped. His jaw worked. Because it was easier than asking questions. Tommy, how I should have asked questions. His voice broke on the last word, cracked right down the middle. and he pressed his fist against his mouth and breathed through his nose until he had it back. I should have called. I should have come the first day. I should have... Stop, I said. He stopped, looked at me. You're here now, I said. That counts. He shook his head hard like he wasn't ready to accept that yet. It's not enough. No, I agreed. But it's a start. He sat forward with his elbows on his knees, the same posture Mark had used, I noticed. And then I pushed the observation away, because Tommy was nothing like Mark, and I was not going to let that comparison exist in the same room as my son trying to do something hard. Tommy's hands were shaking slightly. He pressed them together. Are you happy? I asked. He looked up sharply, like the question had come from somewhere unexpected. What? Are you happy with how things are? With your life? He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the window, dark, the city lights scattered below. When he looked back, his eyes were wet, and he wasn't fighting it anymore. I don't know, he said. I don't think I've been happy in a long time. I don't think I know what that would feel like. A pause. His voice went very low. I look at what I post online and none of it means anything. None of it is real. I'm in restaurants alone taking pictures of food so people I barely know will think my life looks good. He exhaled. Mom would have hated that. She would have sat me down and asked me what was actually going on, and I would have told her because she was impossible to lie to. My throat tightened. She was. How did you stand it? He said it without bitterness, genuinely curious the way he used to ask me things when he was small. I never wanted to lie to her, I said. I wanted to deserve her good opinion. There's a difference. Tommy looked at me for a long moment. Then he put his face in both hands, and his shoulders shook, not loud, not dramatic. Just a man coming apart quietly in a hospital chair at midnight, because the week had finally cost too much to hold together. I let him. I didn't reach over and pat his back or tell him it was all right. I just sat there and let him feel what he'd been carrying, because sometimes that's what a father does. After a while, the shaking stopped. He lowered his hands. His face was blotchy and raw and more honest than I'd seen it in 10 years. Dad, he said, I want to do better. I know you do, I said. I mean it. I know you mean it too. I looked at my son. Meaning it is where it starts. The rest is just showing up. He nodded slowly, leaned back, and at some point I couldn't have said exactly when his breathing evened out and his chin dropped toward his chest, and he was asleep in the hospital chair beside my bed, one hand still loosely curled on the armrest. Nurse Carol came in at 1:30 to check my vitals. She looked at Tommy sleeping in the chair. She looked at me. He came, she said quietly. He came late, I said. But he came. She adjusted the monitor setting, made a note, and left without another word. The room settled back into its nighttime sounds. I looked at my son, his face slack and young in sleep, the way it hadn't looked while he was awake. And I thought about a boy of 7 falling asleep in a garage with a small hammer in his hand. He'd found his way back to the garage. It had taken him 31 years and a hospital room and $3,000 worth of shame. But he was here. That was enough for tonight. Tomorrow could ask for more. I've gotten a lot of phone calls in my life that rearranged things. The call from the contractor in 1987 saying the permits had cleared and I could break ground. The call from the hospital in 2019 saying DOTS scans had come back and the doctor needed to speak with us together. The call from the same hospital 3 years later at 6:14 in the morning saying she was gone. Each one of those calls had a before and an after attached to it, a dividing line you crossed, without knowing you were crossing it until you were already on the other side. Monday's call from Linda was different, because this time I was waiting for it. She called at 2:17 in the afternoon. I was watching Tommy sleep in the recliner the nurses had brought in. He'd woken briefly at 7, eaten the breakfast tray, with the focused efficiency of someone recalibrating, and gone back under when the phone buzzed on the tray table. Linda's name on the screen. I picked it up before the second ring. Dad. Her voice was different from any version of it I'd heard in years. The management was gone, the careful tone she'd developed over a decade of handling things, including me. What was left was rawer and younger and frightened. I need to tell you something. I need you to listen all the way through before you say anything. I'm listening, I said. Mark left his laptop open in the kitchen this morning. He went outside to take a phone call, and I needed to print something, and I opened it. A shaky inhale. Dad, there were emails from something called Premier Capital Advisors about a debt $180,000. And there were messages about the house, about closing quickly, about using the authorization documents before anyone checked them too carefully. Her voice fractured on the last sentence. Dad, I didn't know. I need you to believe me that I didn't know all of it. Tell me exactly what you signed, I said. A long pause. Long enough that I heard her breathing change the way it changes when someone is deciding whether to be honest about something that reflects badly on them. He put papers in front of me in September, she said finally. He said they were standard documents for managing your affairs while your health was a concern. He said you'd discussed it. He said you'd asked him to take care of things because you trusted him. Her voice broke into pieces. I signed them, Dad. I signed them because he told me you wanted me to, and because I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe we were doing something you'd asked for. The thing about Linda is that she has never been a good liar. Even as a child, the lie always showed somewhere in the set of her shoulders, in the way she talked too much when she was covering something. What I was hearing now was not a lie. It was confession, which is an entirely different thing and costs more to produce. Linda, I said, do you remember what your mother asked you the morning before she died? The silence on her end had a different quality now. Heavier. She asked me to take care of you, Linda said. Her voice had gone very small. Not the house. You. And what did you do instead? She didn't answer. What she did was cry, not the controlled kind, not the kind that stays within acceptable social parameters. She cried the way her mother cried the day she saw the kitchen finished, the overwhelmed kind, the kind that means something landed exactly where it was supposed to, even if what landed was terrible. I let her cry. I sat in my hospital room with my son sleeping in a recliner 10 feet away, and my daughter coming undone on the phone, and I let it happen because some things need to finish arriving before you can deal with what they mean. When she could speak again, she said, "Whose side am I on? Is that what you're asking?" "That's what I'm asking." "Yours," she said, without hesitation. "Dad, I'm on yours. I should have been from the beginning. I'm sorry it took me this long to find my way back there." I looked at the window. Gray October Monday, outside clouds sitting low over the city. I thought about Dot writing in that journal Linda has her father's hands. Steady and strong. I just hope she uses them to build, not to take. "Linda," I said, "I need you to do something for me. Anything. Hi, Mark is going to try to move the closing up. He may already be planning it for Wednesday. I need you to not tell him anything has changed. Can you do that? A pause, then steadier than I expected. Yes, I can do that. And I need you to open the front door Wednesday morning when I knock. Her breath caught. You're coming home. Wednesday, I said. 10 o'clock. Tell no one. After we hung up, I sat very still for a moment. Then I made 3 calls in 11 minutes. Ruth, first Wednesday, 10 a.m. bring everything. Frank, second Wednesday, 10 a.m. be inside before we arrive. Walter, third Wednesday, 10 a.m. park down the street, have your footage ready. Tommy stirred in the recliner and opened his eyes and found me looking at him. What's happening? He said. Wednesday, I said. I need you to come with me. He sat up straighter. No hesitation, no negotiation, no asking what it would require of him. Okay, Hugh said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, which I supposed it was, which it should always have been. I pressed the call button for Nurse Carol. When she appeared in the doorway, I said, I need to speak with my doctor about discharge options. She looked at me for a long moment. You're not medically cleared for another 2 days, Mr. Holt. I know, I said. I'd like to discuss my options anyway. She studied my face, the particular professional assessment of a woman who has seen patients make bad decisions for a quarter century and learned to distinguish the ones that were about fear from the ones that were about something else entirely. I'll get Dr. Okafor, she said. The AMA Form Against Medical Advice is a document that exists because American hospitals have learned that patients are adults who retain the right to make their own decisions, even inadvisable ones. You sign it, you acknowledge the risks, you take responsibility for what happens next. I had signed harder things than that. I had signed a mortgage at 29 with savings that barely covered the down payment on a house I intended to build myself with skills I was still learning. I had signed Dot's end-of-life care documents with a hand I could barely keep steady. I signed the AMA form Tuesday morning without any difficulty at all. Wednesday was coming. So was I. And for the first time in 10 days, those two facts felt like exactly the same thing. Against medical advice. 3 words on a form. What they mean is, I understand the risks, I accept the consequences, and there is somewhere I need to be more than I need to be here. Dr. Okafor had given me the look doctors give patients who have made up their minds, the look that is part professional concern and part reluctant respect, and told me to take the medications, avoid physical exertion, and return immediately if the chest tightness came back. I told him I would. I meant it. I just had something to do first. Ruth picked up Tommy and me at the hospital entrance at 8:40 Wednesday morning. She drove a dark blue sedan that smelled of coffee and legal files, and she handed me a folder as I got in, organized, tabbed every document in the order it would be needed. I had always liked Ruth for exactly this quality. She understood that preparation was its own kind of courage. Frank is already inside, she said, pulling out of the hospital lot. He arrived at 9:30 last night and stayed. Said he wanted to be there when the house woke up. She paused. Walter called me at 7. He's parked on Elm 2 houses down. He has 43 videos. He organized them chronologically and sent me the timestamps. 43, Tommy said from the back seat. Walter is thorough, I said. We turned onto my street at 9:52. I looked at the house through the passenger window as we came down the block, the white oak siding the porch rail, the garden gone dormant for winter, but still shaped the way Dot had always kept it. The maple was full red against the gray morning sky, blazing the way it blazed every October, the way it had blazed every October since Tommy and I planted it 31 years ago. The maple looks good, Tommy said softly from the back seat. It always does this time of year, I said. Linda opened the door before I knocked. She was pale, and her eyes were swollen from a night that had clearly not included much sleep, and she stepped back to let me in without a word, which was exactly right. Some moments don't need preamble. The living room. My living room, the floors I'd laid myself, the fireplace surround. I'd built the winter after we moved in the bookshelves along the east wall that I'd adjusted 3 times until Dot was satisfied with the height. Frank was seated at the dining table across from Mark, 2 coffees between them, a folder open in front of Mark that I recognized from 40 feet away as the purchase and sale agreement. Mark looked up when I walked in. The color left his face so completely and so fast that I thought for a moment he might actually fall. His hand holding a pen above the signature line went rigid. The pen didn't move. Frank set his coffee down and stood up. "I'm going to need to stop you right there, Mark." Walter came through the front door behind Tommy. I hadn't heard him come up the porch steps, but he was there, phone in hand, footage already cued. Ruth came in last and set her briefcase on the side table and opened it with the calm efficiency of someone who had been waiting for this room for a week. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. The ring was small, a band of white oak turned smooth on the lathe in my garage in the spring of 2004, sanded until it fit the finger it was made for. Dot had worn it every day for 19 years. Ruth had found it in the envelope with the trust documents wrapped in a square of tissue paper with my name on it. I set it on the table between the purchase agreement and Mark's coffee cup. "Dot sold her wedding ring to save this house," I said. My voice came out steady and low, the voice I used in the garage when a measurement needed to be exact. "She sold it so we wouldn't lose the thing we built together, and you used a forged signature to take it from a man who was lying in a hospital bed." I looked at Mark directly. "I think everyone in this room knows which one of those things is love." Mark's mouth opened. "Ray, My name," I said, "is Mr. Holt." Gracie came out of the hallway. She had been there the whole time I hadn't known until she moved, stepping out of the shadow of the hall doorway and into the room. She crossed to stand beside me without a word, 16 years old and straight-backed and certain, and I put my hand briefly on her shoulder. Then she walked toward Mark, stopped in front of her father, looked at him the way people look at something they are trying to understand and cannot. "Hadikyon," she said. "Did you love us, any of us, or just the house?" Mark looked at his daughter. His mouth moved. Nothing came out. Not a word, not a sound, not a fragment of an answer, because there was no answer available to him that wasn't worse than silence. His eyes filled not with remorse, I thought, but with the particular horror of a man seeing himself clearly for the first time in a mirror he cannot look away from. Tommy stepped forward from behind me and stood at my left side. No one had asked him to. He simply moved there and stayed, and I felt the weight of him beside me the way you feel a wall you've built yourself, solid, load-bearing, finally in the right place. Linda moved from the doorway where she had been standing. She crossed the room and stood on my right. Ruth opened her folder. "Mark, I'm going to need you to put the pen down." He put the pen down. "I'm calling the police now," Ruth said. She said it the way she said everything consequential, without drama, without satisfaction, with the simple finality of someone stating what comes next. Mark sat in his chair. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He just sat there with the purchase agreement in front of him and the ring on the table and his daughter's question still hanging in the air of a room that had been built by someone who understood what it meant to make something that lasts. I walked to the kitchen window, opened it. The October air came in cool and clear, carrying the smell of the garden and the last of the season's leaves. And something older underneath it, the particular scent of a house that has been lived in and loved for a long time. Outside, the maple stood where it always stood, red and steady and entirely itself. I put my hand on the windowsill, the sill I had set myself leveled 3 times to make it right, and I breathed. People always want to know what happened after. After is usually quieter than the during. The during has momentum and dread, and the particular electric quality of things being decided. After is dishes being washed and phone calls being made, and the ordinary machinery of consequences grinding forward at its own pace. After doesn't make for dramatic telling. But after is where you find out what things actually cost, and what they were actually worth, and whether the person you were during turned out to be the person you wanted to be. So here is after. Mark was arrested Wednesday afternoon, 2 hours after Ruth made her call. The charges were felony forgery under California Penal Code 470, elder financial abuse under Welfare and Institutions Code 115-10, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. His attorney, a man I never met, and have no wish to enter a not guilty plea at the arraignment the following Monday. The case was pending as of the last time Ruth updated me, moving through the system, the way these things move slowly, and with paperwork at every turn. Ruth told me to be patient. I told her I'd been patient for 72 years, and I was reasonably good at it. Linda filed for divorce 11 days after the arrest. She told me on the phone, her voice steady in the way things are steady after the hard part has already happened. "I should have done this years ago," she said. "I just couldn't see it clearly from inside it." I didn't tell her she should have. I didn't tell her anything except that I was glad she'd called, which was true, and that I was here, which was also true. Some conversations don't need more than that. She and Gracie moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the west side of the city. Linda got a job at a property management company, the honest kind, she told me, with a dry humor I recognized as dots, and started working her way back to something that was hers. We talked on Sundays. Not long calls, not yet, but regular ones. The regularity mattered more than the length. Tommy transferred $3,000 to my account on the 19th of October at 3:14 in the morning. No message, no explanation. Just the money moved back without ceremony or negotiation in the middle of the night when no one was watching. I called him the next morning. He answered immediately, like he'd been waiting. "You didn't have to call," he said. "I know," I said. "That's why I did." A pause. Then a sound that might have been a laugh, the real kind, small and surprised. "Fair enough." We talked for 22 minutes, the longest phone call we'd had in years. He told me he'd enrolled in a financial counseling program, the kind the county offered for people who had been, as he put it, pretty irresponsible with money for a pretty long time. He said it without self-pity, which was new. He'd also picked up a part-time position with a contractor in the valley doing site prep and materials work. Nothing glamorous. He came home dirty and tired, and he said weirdly satisfied in a way he hadn't felt in years. It's the work," I told him. "The kind where you can see what you did at the end of the day." "Yeah," he said. "I think that's it." He came for dinner 3 weeks later. We ordered pizza because my kitchen was still putting itself back together after 10 days of other people living in it, and we sat at the table Dot and I had bought with the first real paycheck I'd ever earned, and we talked about nothing important for 2 hours. It was the best evening I'd had in longer than I could accurately remember. Ruth finalized the trust amendment in late October. The terms were clean and simple. The house held in trust for Gracie to transfer to her ownership when she turned 21, with Raymond Holt as trustee until that date. Tommy received a specified amount contingent on completing his financial counseling program and maintaining stable employment for 12 months, not punitive, just structured. Something to work toward rather than wait for. Linda received nothing in terms of property. That was her choice, not mine. She called me after Ruth sent the documents and said, "The house was never mine to claim. It was yours and Mom's, and then it was Gracie's. I just took too long to understand that." I told her understanding it now was enough. I meant it. The first Saturday in November, Walter came over at 7 in the morning with the chessboard under his arm and 2 coffees from the gas station. On the corner, the good gas station, the one that actually maintains its coffee machine. We set up on the porch. The maple had dropped most of its leaves by then, the yard covered in red and orange, the tree itself gone spare and architectural against the pale November sky. Walter moved his queen's pawn. I moved mine. "You look better," he said. "For I feel better. The house looks better too." He studied the board. "You fixed the 4th stair." I had fixed the 4th stair. 3 days after I got home on a Tuesday morning when the light was good, I'd pulled the loose board and re-secured it properly. It had taken 40 minutes. Dot had always said she liked the creak, that it told her where everyone was in the house. She was right, but everyone was somewhere different now, and the creak had started to sound like something that needed finishing rather than something worth keeping. I took Walter's night. He smiled. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. Gracie came on a Saturday in early December. She arrived at 9 in the morning with her backpack, the same heavy one from the hospital, still overstuffed with things she might need, and found me in the garage working on a cabinet door that had been waiting since October. She set the bag down, pulled a stool to the corner, and sat with her chin in both hands the way Linda used to, watching. "Can you teach me how to do that?" she asked. I set down the plane, looked at my granddaughter. "Which part?" "All of it." I stood up and crossed to the workbench, the bench I'd built in 1991, the one with the vise on the left end, because I'm left-handed and it matters. I opened the bottom drawer. Inside, beneath a folded cloth and a set of chisels I'd been meaning to sharpen, was a notebook. Spiral-bound, water-stained at the corner, the cover soft with age. My first design notebook, the one from 1986, the one that held the early sketches of the house before I'd translated them into proper blueprints. Inside the front cover, in my own handwriting from 40 years ago, the measurements, the materials list, the calculations for the foundation load. And on the inside of the back cover in blue ink, I recognized immediately the ink Dot always used, the pen she kept in her purse. From the day I met her, a note I had never seen before. She must have written it sometime in those last months, slipped it into the notebook, when I wasn't looking, the way she did things she wanted to last. I read it once. Then I walked across the garage and put the notebook into Gracie's hands. She opened it, read the front, turned pages slowly, looking at the sketches, the calculations, the handwriting of a 29-year-old man who was building something for the first time and was not entirely sure he could do it. When she got to the back cover, she went still. "What does it say?" I asked. She looked up. Her eyes were bright and full, but she held them the Dot way, the way that saves it for what deserves it. "It says our home, built with love. Keep it that way." Her voice was steady, but barely. "And underneath that, it says, Gracie, this is yours now. Make something wonderful." The garage was quiet around us. The good kind of quiet, the kind that comes from tools at rest and work waiting to be done, and 2 people sitting with something that matters. "All right then," I said. "Let's start with the plane. Hold it like this." She held it like that. Her hands were steady. Of course they were. She had her grandmother's stubbornness and her grandfather's hands. What she built with them was going to be something worth seeing. I was already looking forward to it. I spent 10 days in a hospital bed, learning something I should have understood decades earlier. Silence is not the same as peace. Keeping the receipts is not the same as keeping score. And building a home for people who never learn to value it is not generosity. It is a slow kind of disappearing. If I could go back and tell my younger self one thing, It would be this: don't do what I did. Don't love so quietly that the people around you forget love requires a witness. Don't carry so much alone that carrying alone becomes your identity. Speak up before the 10th year, before the hospital bed, before the forged signature on a document that was supposed to represent your trust. I'm not a man who talks about faith easily, but I believe God puts certain people in your path at exactly the right moment: a neighbor with a video camera, a granddaughter who misses nothing, a friend who picks up the phone on the first ring. Those aren't coincidences. Those are answers to prayers you didn't know you were praying. This has been one man's story, a grand pastory's moment that became something larger than I expected when I lived it. If you've ever been the one who builds while others take, this family revenge story was for you. These grand pastories remind us that quiet people have the longest memory. And when a revenge story ends with truth spoken plainly in a room full of people who needed to hear it, that isn't drama. That is justice. If this story reached you somewhere real, leave a comment below. I read everyone. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is a good moment to do that. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know. And a gentle note: some stories on this channel contain fictional elements crafted with the purpose of exploring real human experiences. If that's not what you're looking for, no hard feelings. Find the content that's right for you. But if you're staying, I'll see you in the next one.